Hello, everybody. This is Tuesday, March 13th. This is the weekly Sig Testing meeting. Um, I'm going to paste the link to the meeting notes into the chat. If you have anything that you want to put on the agenda, go ahead and suggest it there. The first item, Tim, you've got the floor, talking about cross-CI jobs and build dependencies.
So I don't quite understand the dependency graph between some of the tests. There's a cross builder which publishes a bunch of artifacts into a separate GCS bucket, and then some other tests leverage it. That's part of what we're seeing on side of the kubeadm release blocking jobs for the 1.9 to 1.10 upgrade. But it doesn't look like they've actually been working for a long time. So I don't exactly know who owns it or maintains it, but I do know that the problem that we are facing, the reason why we have this weird one person shuffles a bit off to the other location that the other person depends upon is because all the build artifacts aren't produced from a single canonical location. And so there's two parts to this question. One is who owns the cross CI build jobs? And the second one is where is Basil at for cross builds?
I think owning the build jobs is kind of both release and test. But as far as the dependency graph goes, other than the Kubernetes jobs normally pick up the CI build job, not the CI cross build job. And we publish like a latest tag file, which they consume. That's most jobs.
I inherited this, so I don't exactly know what's sane and what's not sane and why.
Bazel cross building is not being run in CI. Locally, you can cross build the PureGo images, I think, now. So like binaries that don't depend on Sego, but Sego, while possible, there's no infrastructure. We need to inform it of the C tool chains.
What build artifacts depend upon Sego?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think Jeff is looking into this. It's on GitHub, but I'm not sure if anyone else is, and I don't know what the plan is there. I think we should probably be making them depend on the CI build job, but it's not clear how much effort that will be and where that should happen.
Should we log an issue somewhere so at least we can track it? I don't know if it would go into test infra. It probably seems like it would go into test infra.
There's an issue in test infra around the inconsistency with the cross jobs. It's not clear to me what the correct answer is. It looks like there's a different path for those depending on if it's a master release job or not, which is interesting.
So how are we going to track resolution on this? And does it, we can test asynchronous of this, right? Like we can do this by hand to validate behavior, and we will probably do that anyways, just to be careful. But ideally, this automation looks like it's been broken for a really long time, and no one was paying attention until we got to release. So
I think this sounds like a test infra issue to me, and there is one for the cross build, but it's not obvious what the build publishing should look like for the previous branches outside of the release build.
Well, if we link the issues in the meeting notes with a set of issues, then I'll just follow up with them and loop in the SIG release folks, because they keep on poking me and I'm poking back, and I'm like, I don't know who owns this. So
there's also just a large mess around the using Kubernetes Anywhere is actually taking in a couple of independent versions. So at the moment, the Kubernetes jobs are actually using the CI build, the Bazel CI build, and the CI cross build, which is
it's crazy. Yeah, my plan in the 1.11 cycle, in talking with the cluster API folks, long-term Google wants to get rid of all of the cluster directory. And in getting rid of all of the cluster directory and adding cluster API into the mix. And I would love to have folks tag team in setting up blocking build jobs that get rid of Kubernetes Anywhere and use the cluster API in the 111 cycle.
Okay. Here is the cross issue.
Okay, cool. So we'll take that discussion out to the issue. The next item on the agenda, I think, Cole, you could just jump in here. The state of the Tide rollout. It looks like we were kind of putting in the last pieces here, and we might be close to rolling Tide out for KK as well.
Yeah. So since I'm going on vacation on Friday, I don't know if I'm going to be able to. I don't know if it's a good idea for me to roll it out before I go. Unless someone else is willing to own that. Otherwise, I can roll it out as soon as I get back. We have that'll give it some time to soak, I guess. So that could be a good thing to do just because we just rolled out the new status changes. That being said, they're probably not a particularly volatile thing or something that could cause problems, really. So we could roll it out soon.
And so I guess the one question I had, and this kind of touches on the last point on the list as well. There was a conversation about how many tokens we were about to be using after code thaw. And then also I know that like with the status change implementation for Tide, there's a lot of conversation about whether or not that would use too many tokens. Like, are we worried about running out of quota there?
Yeah, so I've actually been monitoring this like just over the past couple hours because Ben just rolled out the status updates, and it really should not be using that many tokens, or it should be using a few hundred tokens, I guess, the first time to set all the statuses. And if you look at the API token usage graphs on Velodrome, you can see that there's a small spike, but it's not super significant. When we do deploy for the main Kubernetes repo, it will only set statuses for some of the PRs at first, and then it will stop. So we have separate rate limiting for that now. So we shouldn't run into problems. It'll just be, it'll take a couple hours essentially for all the statuses to be set for Kubernetes, but we won't run out of tokens. So I think we should be pretty okay. Like I think everything will, token-wise, I think we're ready for Kubernetes.
Are we actively feeling any pain from remaining on the mudgers until you get back from vacation?
Um,
I know, Ben, you did a redeploy maybe a week ago. That was kind of frustrating.
Munge GitHub is always frustrating.
Yeah, so like when we do code thaw, I'm assuming that we're going to thaw to continue to use the submit queue and not go immediately to Tide from that. So once that's done anyways, there shouldn't be any change at all. Like the deployments won't be touched, I assume, for a week after that.
Okay. Okay, cool. So we're close, and I guess it just depends on if somebody wants to own it while you're gone.
I'm good for owning it. I'm not sure if we're quite ready to make the switch over. I think it might be a good idea to be ready to be linking to the PR status page instead of the Tide. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, also, I like the tracker issue, which is way old in the meeting notes. There was a couple other things that I don't know if we want to consider blockers for the actual implementation. There was a request to be able to ignore specific statuses that came in a couple weeks ago. And then I can't quite, I think then there was another request that the Tide status has to be required. And so I guess if you want to also say, hey, let's make sure we can link the PR status, let's try to put all that into the tracker so we can at least keep tabs on it.
I don't think we have to get the Tide status to required to roll out for Kubernetes. I also don't think we have to be able to ignore context for Kubernetes since we have like skip and retest and things, and we generally don't report tests that aren't blocking.
Right. So I guess if it's just going out to the repo, not the org, then that should be fine.
Yeah, it's not actually important for the Tide status to be required at all. There's no race condition or anything there. That's more like a UI thing. And it almost makes sense for it not to be required if people are going to manually merge. If there's going to still be a few people, but I'm not sure. Probably doesn't make a big difference.
Okay.
Those other points, though, should be quick fixes, like making or allowing for other contexts to be skipped. That's an easy one to add.
Okay. The last thing on the agenda that I just put in here really quickly, just to do an update of the pod utility work that I'm doing. I updated the tracking issue to have a more detailed breakdown. And so we're finished with the first phase, upstreaming all the utilities that we were using. And then now I've also refactored the majority of the jobs downstream at OpenShift Origin to use the utilities from test infra. And so they're getting battle tested and soaked, and we're finding little bugs here and there. I am right now working on a pod spec that will integrate all these things with the init containers the way that we expect them to. We just removed. We can now put that pod spec directly into the prod config and have Plank just use it verbatim, and so that'll be the next step. And so once that's verified, we can start bike shitting about how the config should look.
Actually, quick note there. Sen and I have been talking about the fact that Kubernetes' prod config is still enormous.
Yeah.
And that it's difficult to do things like breaking changes to the config. I'm hoping kind of in the next quarter here, we'll put out a plan for some proposals around redesigning the config a bit. There have been some other interesting ideas that kicked around. Joe kicked around the idea of inverting it and having repos refer to jobs instead of inlining them, some things like that. Possibly versioning the types. Hopefully we can make that part of rolling out the pod utilities.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. Or, and I know this was another thing that I think, had been considered, but I'm not sure we decided to go with it. If we wanted to break out the Plank configuration and just be able to silo like a smaller Plank with a more restrictive label selector. But yeah, that definitely seems reasonable.
We have a real pain point right now around if we change the config format, we have to warn everyone and then we have to roll it out. So we're looking towards maybe using API versions like Kubernetes does for the actual prod job components. I'm going to write a doc after I finish. We have a lot of writing to do here at Google with proof cycle going on.
Okay. Okay, that's everything that we had on the agenda for this week. I guess Brian asked in chat if type check is blocking on Kubernetes yet.
I've been waiting for lazy consensus and I'm putting out a PR today. It seems like lazy consensus is let's do it.
Okay.
Great.
Cool. Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up? Awesome. 15 minutes early. Have a good week, everyone.